All right, we'd like to welcome you to the weekly update here for the first week dealing with the judges training and just trying to get some more information out to all of our judges. Just kind of an update on what's happened here up to this point. We've got about 130 judges that are certified in at least one caption, and many of you guys are certified on multiple captions. I've been getting a lot of feedback, a lot of questions about the training module, and that's been very interesting to hear some of your comments and your thoughts, and a lot of great questions that have been coming back, either being sent through emails. I hear there's a lot of discussions happening at shows, and additionally, the form that we sent out the beginning of this week, there's a lot of great questions on there that we're going to try to answer for you this evening. We're going to try to work to do this every week, so be on the lookout for a Google form that'll come out Sunday evenings probably, and it'll close pretty quickly so we can get questions together and present them here in this video for you by the end of the week. I want to talk a little bit about a couple questions that came up. The first one is the evaluation system that we're doing this year for KMEA. First of all, we need to all understand that these are the expectations of the members and the participating groups. A lot of them have seen this training. A lot of them have, they're familiar with the sheets, and that's what they'll expect out of us as judges. These sheets are modeled after Bands of America. However, the process for evaluation is borrowed from a national approach. They use this in DCI, they use it WGI, and then of course at BOA also. So we just need to understand that we're independent contractors, and when we're out there evaluating bands at KMEA sanctioned contests, it is the expectation that we're following these guidelines and judging within the sheet as it's stated. The scoring range, there was a couple questions about the scoring range, and that cap was lifted, I believe, 2 years ago. Bands, however, should be able to compare scores across the state and nationally if the numbers are being applied correctly. Now, I realize that this will take a little bit of time to make this happen, but the thought is that a contest in Western Kentucky, we should be able to compare those numbers to a contest in Eastern Kentucky also. A quick glance at the scores from last week. Those ranges were from the low end was a 31.95 to the high was a 76.3. And just for comparison's sake, to take a look at last year's BOA first regional event. And of course, remember this was in Texas, and this would have been their first week. However, this would have been our third week of competition, and those ranges went from a 53.7 to a high of 79.8. I think there's a regional coming up this upcoming weekend, so it'll be interesting to take a look at those numbers and be able to compare them to maybe what our ranges are for this weekend, especially since we're roughly on the same sheets. A little different point distribution, but roughly on the same sheets. So the suggestion here with the scoring cap being removed is just to follow the back of the sheet, using the thirds to arrive at your number. And we kind of need to get rid of the old idea of what an 80 looks or sounds like. We've got to redefine this for ourselves. I want to introduce you to the two guests that we've got this weekend or this week on the videos here. And first one is Stephen Page, and then we've also got Tim Hudnall here. Stephen, if you'll take just a second, maybe tell us a little bit about yourself and just so who we know who we're talking to.
Yes, thanks, Brian. I teach band and choir at Heath Middle School in Paducah, and I've been judging marching band and drum corps and concert festival and all kinds of stuff for the last 18 years. Judged a lot of BOA regionals, judged at DCI championships 11 times.
Excellent. We're glad to have you here, Stephen. Tim, if you'll take a second to tell us about yourself.
Sure. Been involved kind of in the pageantry business, if you will, for maybe 30 years and started focusing on judging probably more so in the last 10 years. Did a lot with KMEA in terms of judging, and now kind of spreading out a little bit more in my home state that I'm in, Tennessee. Also judging for BOA, and been focusing a lot with WGI as well.
Great, great. So both of you guys have a lot of experiences here. You also are very familiar with the state of Kentucky, and you've been involved pretty intimately with the state. So I know you're going to have some great information here for us this evening. So maybe talk a little bit about ensemble versus individual evaluation. We've got a lot of questions about that, and I know this is a topic of discussion that I've heard quite often. So I might throw the question out there: why is evaluating ensemble and individual important educationally?
Yeah, I'll jump in first. You know, when you're out there on the field with the kids, you're really able to sample what that individual student can do. You're able to see their hand position on the instrument or on the material, on the equipment. You're able to see how their embouchure is set up, and you're able to get a better understanding of what that individual student knows about their show. Are they going through the motions and concentrating only on their visual responsibility, or are they really contributing musically? You know, it's the difference in when you ask a question in a class. Are you just calling on the kids whose hands are raised, or are you truly getting a good sample of every single kid in your class? And when you're out there on the field judging individual, you're seeing what each student can do. Ideally, you're seeing that.
Excellent, excellent. You know, ensemble and individual judges. I think there's this thought that the old thought of our music performance ensemble judges and our visual performance judges should always be seeing and hearing the same thing, and those scores should be pretty close to one another. But in this case, you know, you do a lot of individual and ensemble judging. Stephen, do you see differences when you're on the field as opposed to up in the press box?
You really do. On the field, you get I believe I get a better sample on the field for the group's content. It's easier for me on the field to know what they're being asked to do visually while they play. And from the box, you might not get as good of a understanding of that. I would say you're never going to have an ensemble and an individual judge be way off. Say you've got 15 groups in a contest. If the music ensemble judge has one group third, the individual judge might have them first or sixth, but you're really not going to have them 15th. There shouldn't be that big of a gap in the ordinals, but there probably is always going to be a gap. Ideally, as the season goes on, I would say those judges are going to line up a little more, that what you're going to get from the box is a more accurate representation of what the individual is doing. But at the beginning of the year, there could be a pretty significant difference in what people hear at the box.
Understand. Makes a lot of sense. So, you know, we talk about in the training about sampling, and this really applies to the field level. And I'm sure, Tim, you have some thoughts about this too on the visual side. But Stephen, I might ask you, you know, what does sampling mean, and how can you make that work on the field?
Sampling means you're hearing or seeing a representative mix of all the kids. So if you can go back and listen to your tape, which hopefully everybody does. If you go back and listen to your tape, and you know, if the percussion is a third of the ensemble, really a third of your commentary needs to be directed towards the percussion. Now, this time of year, I judged a show Saturday in Indiana, and it was pretty much everybody did their opener. A few groups did their opener and the ballad. And, you know, if you're only going to do your opener and your ballad, you haven't gotten to a significant drum break yet. There's a lot of times I got to the end of the show and I was like, sorry, didn't really sample the battery, because the battery had not really played much and they hadn't been in the focus very much. But I'll kind of make a little checklist in my head, and I'll sit there and think, okay, the opener's done, and I commented on the woodwinds a lot and the trumpets some. And then during the ballad, okay, I heard this soloist, and I heard the front ensemble, and I heard a little low brass. Then I'm kind of thinking in the back of my head, all right, 2/3 of the show is done, and I have not commented significantly on the battery or the altos, the mellophone, alto sax section. Then I'm going to be positive that the top of the closer, I'm finding those kids, so that at the end of a run, I've given some legitimate commentary to every section. That's what we're going for.
Right. Tim, do you have any thoughts on this, on the visual side?
Yeah, I think Stephen made a really important point right off the bat. I think you've got to go back and listen to, you don't have to listen to every commentary tape, but I think if you'll listen, you're going to pick up on this. And this is new for a lot of people being on the field, and that whole sampling idea, a lot of that, I think the problems that are going to pop up are you're going to go with what you're familiar with. So if you're a percussionist, you're going to naturally want to listen to the percussion. If you're a brass player, you're going to want to listen to brass. And on the visual side, if you're a color guard person, your eye's going to be drawn to that. So you've really just got to force yourself to make yourself aware of where you're looking and get around on the field without being a distraction, and being able to sample not only what's visually up front, but what's going on towards the back as well, because that's where you're really going to pick up some individual people, students, performers that maybe aren't being at the highest level of achievement that you might want.
Right. Well, and you bring up a good point there, and maybe this kind of gets us into some tips for the individual judge. But when you're talking about sampling, are you guys looking to sample the entire ensemble, a smaller section? What are you doing there?
I'm trying to give as much feedback to individual students as I can. If you get a small group, say you've got 25, 30 kids out there, you're gonna be able to give some feedback to half the ensemble that are going to get specific commentary. And a lot of times, I'll try to reference the the field placement. The trumpet that is a little bit outside the 35 on stage left, he's struggling with maintaining pitch. And when you can be that detailed, now when it's a big group, you can't give that individual kind of attention, but you're still getting a lot of specific feedback to those kids, one that they can listen to on their tape. Something that's been beneficial to me when I'm sampling early in the year, I'll try to really give commentary on what the main idea is. So say there's an oboe solo, I'll walk over and try to get a good read on that oboe soloist. But then you get 3 or 4 weeks into the season, and I'm going to assume that if they've got a soloist, that kid can play. And I might make a comment a little bit about the beginning of that solo. And then half the way through the phrase, I'm going to be out there trying to find some of the accompaniment people and see if they're really sustaining, see if they're really fulfilling their role, rather than sit there and hear the melody the whole time.
Right. Understand. Tim, what about on your side, on the visual side? Any thoughts about what you're trying to sample? Who full ensemble, color guard, what?
You really have to think in thirds of the winds, the percussion, and the color guard. And so many times the color guard is spread out way across the field. Horns tend to be a little more central now. Percussion kind of front as well. You can get around the entire field. One thing I like to do, and like Steve, and I try to identify where I'm at on the field when I'm making that comment. But I like to start in the same place with every group, unless there's an obvious issue with props or where the band's actually starting. And then this kind of leads into the tips per se. I like to try to make an arc around at least one time so I'm getting a good sample along the back and then also across the front.
Very good. That's very helpful information. So as we get into the tips here, I mean, the individual judge on the field is very new for most of our judges at Kentucky. And Stephen, if I can just turn it over to you for a second, what are some tips maybe that you have that you picked up as you've been on the field for a number of years?
Something that's worked well for me is, especially if you get multiple views with a group, and I think a lot of Kentucky judges will probably see some of the same groups too, maybe even 3 or 4 times this season. I will consciously start on a different side of the field. So the first time I'll see a group, for example, I'm going to always start on their left. And because that's going to kind of lead you, if you're starting in one area, that's going to lead you in kind of a logical path. And if you see a show repeatedly, which happens a lot in the summer with DCI, you may see a show 7 times and you realize that second or third time on this phrase, I'm always out here by the third baritones, and I don't want to be. So first time you see a show, maybe start from the left. Second time you see a show, start from the right. And a lot of times that will lead you through a whole different set of students as the show goes on. Another thing that I've found has been kind of helpful for me is if there's a big concept, like these kids don't understand the trumpet section does not understand how to start a note, for example. We're not getting a clear articulation front to the note. I won't go into this whole like long dissertation about brass pedagogy in the middle of, as soon as I hear that. I'll kind of save that. If there's a time later on where there's not as much going on musically, say there's a big voiceover and you got 15 seconds with sound effects, then that can be where you throw in a little how to teach brass articulation lesson, but kind of save that in the back of your head.
Oh, that's a great point. That's one I'm going to stick in my judge's bag there. Tim, any thoughts on some tips here for the individual judge?
Well, I'll piggyback Steve there for a moment. It's kind of the same visually. You may identify a deficit, but there's so much going on now that you're evaluating that many times you're going to have to come back to that at the end and offer a suggestion. If you don't have the time to do it when it's occurring, make sure you try to remember that and bring it up at the end. As for tips, stay hydrated, especially here in the heat wave. You do your best to not interfere with anything that's going on the field. And Stephen makes a good point. These people that are going to see the same shows week after week, you'll start to learn what's happening and where that's going to happen. And, try not to box yourself in. I personally don't go out in the middle of the field because on the visual aspect, I'm able to see pretty well from the sideline or the periphery, where I know music people tend to want to get closer to get those individuals. So I think there might be a little difference there. I don't know how Steven feels about that.
I haven't really gone out on the field much at all for the last 3 or 4 years. I've tried to consciously stay out of the performance, let the kids do their show. The only time it really happens is if a section, if there's a part of the field where you have a significant moment backfield. I feel like if I wasn't getting out there and sampling what these kids are doing playing backfield, then it's a disservice to the other ensembles that are playing front all the time. I'm not going to let some ensemble, kind of mask themselves for 2 minutes. Or if I get to the end of a show and I'm like, wow, I haven't said a word about the tubas and low woodwinds, I might have to go out a little bit to find them. DCI has made that tougher this year, but so far in the band world, you can get where you need to.
Right.
Great. Well, there's some great comments there about the individual judge, and I know that we'll continue talking about that through the coming weeks, because this is something that we're all growing a lot in this state, because we're just uncomfortable. This is something we haven't done a lot of. I got some questions about what and how we train. We really focused a lot on that in the training module, and I think we felt like that was something that was really important to introduce and make sure that we have a good understanding of. So maybe if we can very generally just talk about this a little bit. I still hear people referring to what is the content or how difficult stuff is, and wondered if any of you guys had wanted to discuss that at all.
Well, I think it is kind of a misnomer that difficult means, or what is always the difficult. I mean, what is basically, in a nutshell, the opportunities that are being provided for the performer. Most of the time that's coming from the design team. We're asking them to have specific challenges or skill sets. From a compositional standpoint, we're asking certain things of them. So it's not necessarily difficult. That's kind of where I go with that.
I think also in this art form, the what is not readily apparent sitting in a score. If you're listening to a band at a concert festival, there's the what. It's literally printed. If you're judging all district auditions, there's the what. You're literally looking at the A-flat scale. But in this activity, the what is memorized by the kid. It's written down on the back of an envelope a few weeks ago or a few weeks earlier at a bar. The what is not as obviously defined. So as judges, we have to literally say what it is we're seeing, or we have to say what it is we're hearing. Otherwise, there can't be an assumption that we know what it is. In concert festival, there's an assumption that you know what it is because it's right there. But in this activity, it's not. If you're not also articulating what it is you're hearing and what it is you're seeing, then you're kind of, I don't want to say you're disqualifying yourself as a judge, but it's important that the students and the teachers know that what's going on.
Right.
Yeah. It's
So
that sorry.
go ahead, Tim. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to
I was
interrupt.
going to say, it's that whole philosophy that we get ingrained with, the digging deeper. There's so much on the surface, but we have to be able to read through that and not, as Stephen said, not make an assumption, but be able to detail what's actually being presented in front of us and being able to basically slice it apart and look at all of the pieces and how they fit together for what the students are being asked to do.
Right. So then on that same note, we often hear, the how is all about achievement. It's how clean things are. What's your reaction on that statement?
Well, that's that tricky one, because clean seems to be the word. How is going to be the level of achievement that they're presenting at, and it's going to go into a conversation I think we're going to have here in a minute about derived achievement. But I'm going to take the color guard world, because that's one of my stronger moments there. You can have an ensemble that can spin a front spin together and it be pristine looking, and that, you can call that clean. But you take that same performer and ask them to do that front spin while doing body responsibility or moving, creating part of a triad, it may not be as clean as that pristine moment, but they're still achieving possibly at a greater level than that performer standing still doing a drop spin.
Right. Agreed. Stephen, I wonder if you had any thoughts about the clean idea?
I think if you look at that first bullet, does what mean how difficult something is? I think no. I think it's more to it than that. But for number two, does how mean how clean something is? I think depending on how you define the word clean, then it kind of does, especially if you think of clean meaning accurate and with a high level of clarity. I think you can get closer to saying yes. How well you're doing it is essentially how accurate you're doing it, as long as you're considering what it is they're doing. If you're considering the content, then yes, how is more of an accuracy, clean kind of statement.
Right. Well, and you mentioned a little earlier about, concert band. Like in Kentucky, concert band, we separate all the what out. So there's the grade ones, the grade twos, the grade threes, and on and on. That's not something that we have to evaluate in concert band. It's already, the what is kind of already separated out, and we get to spend all the time talking about the achievement of that. And I think maybe we take that for granted sometimes, that, like you said earlier, that's not in marching band. We don't separate classes by skill sets. So,
Can I throw something at Steve?
Of course.
So you're talking about the clean portion, and this is a thing that comes up a lot at contest. People will talk about, well, that band was really clean. Let's say trumpets. That trumpet section was really clean, and they're playing a minimalist type of score, and then you have band B that's playing something that's much more intricate and perhaps not as pristine. Again, I'll use that word. So their question is going to be, then why is that band A not scoring higher in the how than band B, which is playing a much more technical piece? Maybe I'm jumping ahead, but how would you explain that to somebody at your show that you're judging with that says, well, trumpets were really clean playing those whole notes, and the trumpet line that was playing triple tongue 30-second notes, blah, 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 maybe not quite as clean?
Well, so am I talking to the clean but easy band teacher?
Yes, because I think that's where clean and easy somehow meld into the people who are maybe not quite familiar with putting that.
Right. If I'm talking to someone that is lacking a lot of content, but what they're doing pretty accurately, I've got to be really honest with them and tell them that in 2 or 3 weeks,
mm-hmm.
this is not gonna compare. And you see that so much of the time. I won't say to them, hey, your show's too easy, but I'll tell them, look for opportunities where you can challenge the students even more, because the more we go down this this road of how accurate can we be with no awareness of the content, we're kind of making ourselves a little bit more into coaches and educate than we are educators. And philosophically, I'm not going to get into that too much. But if we want to challenge our kids, I think there's a level of content that we can expect of them. Of course, you definitely see groups that go too far, though. They'll try to have a crazy amount of content that's just over the kid's head.
Right. Good point there. You know, the other thing that I get a lot of questions about is does the what and how mean the same thing in effect, ensemble, and individual? So I hear a lot of people talking about the what, and they're talking about aesthetic qualities and all of those design-oriented kind of things in individual. And wondered if you wanted to comment briefly about how they might be different in the three captions there.
I'll jump in real quick. What and how mean the same things, but there are different whats that you can talk about in the three. The whats that go into effect are not the same whats that go into ensemble or individual.
Great point.
Makes sense.
All right. Continuing on here, and I think this is a discussion that I think Tim can really help us here with, and that is the question of what is derived achievement?
Okay, so I'll put it in the most simplest form, is that you have to evaluate what and how together, and it just kind of goes back to Stephen just prior to this, talking about, you know, the trumpets being really clean, but there's not much content. Derived achievement basically just means that the value of the what, the how is going to be directly related to that. So the more depth there is to the what, the greater the possibility that the how can be rewarded. Because we had this discussion last weekend, and it was, okay, I have a band that doesn't do much at all, and goes back to that pristine statement. Why can't I have what they're doing in box one, because they're not doing anything really but standing still, but they're doing it really well, then that should be box 5. But that kind of goes against the idea of derived achievement, because the quality or depth of what they're being asked to do is still going to be confined in a certain area. We have to evaluate that, and then the more depth they have, the greater the possibility we can reward how well they're doing it or how they're not doing it. Was that?
That's great. Yes. You know, so Stephen or Tim, you know, why do you feel like this might be, you know, we hear a lot about music educators first, or is it an educational association here? And why would this be important educationally to be able to recognize this idea of derived achievement and apply it?
Because I think that's what is going to push students to become better performers, but to reach more of what they can possibly do, which in the end hopefully makes them into a little bit better people. Now, different than it was a couple of generations ago, you can still have a lot of music and visual education happening during the school day. And so music literacy does not really need to be a part of marching band. You know, it's not like the clarinets are learning to sight read because of marching band. So it's not really a music literacy thing, but it's more of a quality tone. It's, you know, do you have the right hand position? Are you breathing the right way? All of that stuff. Breathing, standing still, and producing a great sound is a lot easier than breathing while you're performing, while you're moving. It's a whole different thing. So, you know, I would want that for my own kids, my own students that are in marching band. I want them to be challenged, not just to do something easy right, but to do something that they didn't think they were capable of in July.
Right.
Excellent point.
Excellent. So I think Tim, I think you kind of answered number 3 pretty well for us, about why this is important to understand this. Might throw this out to you guys. Is the what or the how more important when you're evaluating?
I think they have equal merit because we value them the same in the rubric. They both have the same amount of points. I'm trying to think where I would really push that. Stephen, do you have a?
Yeah, I don't think you can even consider one without the other. Whether, and this maybe is a bad analogy, but a great artist doesn't think about they don't just think oil. They also think about, is this going to be on canvas or is this going to be on plaster? They're always considering, whatever they're about to paint, they consider the material they're painting on as well as the materials with which they're painting. And a great artist is not going to be able to consider one without the other. They have to go hand in hand.
Right. I think pre-season, you have to think that as well. I think a lot of people pre-season, when they go into the design mode, either music or visual, they're like, oh, this will be really great. Let's try this. This will be something really fun. And it's, Drum Corps A did this. But I think oftentimes that what is being processed in their minds, and they're not thinking about how the kids can handle that or not.
Yeah.
You guys are starting to hint on a subject that I want to talk about later down the road with some other videos here, and that is the idea of this. We are not only evaluators and critics, but we have to also be educators in this process also. And you're kind of hinting on that, so I just want to open that door up if you have anything that you want to add to that.
Well, I love it. That's one reason I love doing individual, because I can be right there on the field, and I love being able to get a sample for what the kids are doing, but then just telling the staff that's listening to the tape, here's a way that I would fix that. And I love it in a chance in critique, being able to talk to them. How do you teach tuning? Here's what groups that I know that play really well in tune, this is how they work on it. How do you teach pulse and tempo? Because I think that's really where it's at.
Right. All right. So here's a couple questions a couple more questions that we dealt with the harder questions in the previous couple slides, but these are a couple questions that have come up. They're habits that we've been doing for some time, and maybe if we can have some real discussion about these things. So the first one that came up is the consultation between judges, and there's been the philosophy with the last couple of years that all of our scores should all kind of line up, and the judges need to talk about that and all get in the same ranges. And all you guys have been in the press box, you know what is kind of normal and what's not normal with this discussion. So Stephen, if I may just throw it over to you first and kind of get your thoughts on this.
Yeah, I'm always much more comfortable when I can look to see numbers, just because every place is different. And so if you're judging more thinking from a national standpoint, your bottom number is going to be 30, and you think your top number is going to be 50. And where I was this past Saturday, the top number was mid 50s and the bottom number was upper 30s. If somebody came in with a whole different paradigm in their mind, thinking the bottom number was 50 and the top number was 90, then suddenly they're working with 40 points and everyone else is working with 20 points, and they wind up calling the show. I don't think you ever need to consult about, do you think they're first or do you think they're second? But I think it's really important that you consult to be sure that you're in the same range. If you think one group's a 14-8 and the judge next to you says they're a 14-5, you're good to go. But if the judge next to you says they're a 9-4 and you've got them at 14-8, then y'all are gonna have to figure something out. Otherwise, you're canceling one another out.
Right. Tim, any thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think especially early season, here in KMEA with the new sheets, I think there's so much discomfort at first that people are trying to kind of vibe into that. I see no problem with talking ranges. I mean, we do that the WGI level, and I know at BOA, if you're scoring and you get a little bit out of kind of that range, somebody will mention to you, hey, you might want to just reevaluate that. Here's where everybody else is at. Never talking about who's first, who's second, what the actual score is. I don't really have a problem with that. I think as the show progresses, there really doesn't need to be that. I know in the past we sort of taking it on as maybe the first class or up until the first break. And I think I would tell a judge now, especially if you're starting out, you need to be true with yourself. If you're studying and you're learning and you identify where a group's at and you're comfortable with that, don't let somebody come up and say, well, I gave them this score, and then you automatically think, well, I'm wrong. I think you have to trust your training and trust the process. And Steve, Stephen said, if there's a big discrepancy, you would hope that there's somebody in that press box that is assigned to maybe look at that and just come back and say, hey, everybody else is kind of in this box and you're in a way different box. Then there's probably merit to reevaluating that number.
I think it's also important. A lot of people that are hopefully listening to this discussion are going to judge with some people that may not have ever judged in Kentucky, or if they have, it's been 10 or 15 years. And a band that was a rock star 15 years ago might not be this year. It's really easy for someone to come out, and I've had this happen to me, and I've helped some people this way. Somebody puts down a number, and they feel like that they're comfortable with that number. You might want to tell them, hey, there's a good chance there's going to be 4 groups that are as good as that band or better. And if they've already thrown out a really high number and then 4 more groups come out that are even better, then that person's stuck in a situation of, do they put somebody at a 97 in the middle of September, or do they lie and put some group below a group that shouldn't be because they might have messed up one of their early numbers? The same thing can happen at the bottom of the scale. You see somebody that you think is rough and you throw out a 35, you might want to nudge them and be like, hey, dude, there's going to be 3 or 4 groups that might be worse than that 35. You might want to throw them a low 40 to give yourself some room. Otherwise, you've either got to lie or you give somebody a 20, and neither one of those is a good situation.
Well, the other thing that I heard Tim talking about, and well, both of you talking about with the talking of the judges, and trying to compare numbers with one another. So all of the sheets, well, the music sheets and then the visual sheets, I mean, they're related to one another, but there are now 6 different captions. We're looking at 6 different things, as opposed to the days when there were 2 music performance judges and 2 visual performance judges. So, like I said, they're related, but at the same time, there's likely some differences between the judges' sheets and the captions.
It's probably not going to line up. Ordinals probably won't line up.
Right.
Yeah. The other thing I think that might need to be considered too is, don't be afraid to, as long as you're holding sheets, don't be afraid to change a number too. Stephen said, you might go out and give somebody a 35, and then the next band comes out and you need to make an adjustment to that first number. I don't have a problem with that, because I think ultimately it's a disservice if we don't get it as accurate and correct as we can, because that's our job, is to rank first and then go through the whole process of being able to refine that number and get the point spread right, get them in the right place. And I know a lot of people feel like, well, if I put this number down and change it, then that just means I'm a bad judge. And I don't think you can look at it that way.
Well, we're definitely, that's definitely happening on the WGI level, where scores are changing through the entire event to try to get things, on the right areas. Maybe not placements, but just scores, and trying to open up spreads.
Sure.
Stephen, I would assume the same thing's happening on the DCI level. Am I correct?
Yes.
That's what I thought. So just a real quick note about point spreads in the orientation video, or in orientation materials that are going out. This has been written a little bit differently. It actually says significant differences are 6 or more. And just for clarification, because we did get a question about this, those orientation materials are going to be changed here within the coming weeks. But what you're seeing here on the screen is the proper spreads for point spreads, specifically with the significant differences as 7 or more. I think it's also important to make sure we to bring up again that the subcaption spread guidelines are not to be used for the total score, but they're to be used for subcaptions. these numbers mean nothing on the total score of your caption. They only mean something in the sub-captions. These numbers only get applied to the sub-caption. A final question that we got was, and I know it was a discussion at the show that I was at this weekend, is written comments. You know, there's kind of the old unwritten rule about written comments on a judging sheet. And, you know, we're getting judges that are talking about they're concerned they don't have enough time to do all the things they've got to do. So I wonder if you guys have any thoughts about this.
Well, does KMEA have an official policy on that, or?
There are hints to it, but there is not an official policy in place on this, no.
I know the question that came in was really concerning more of the field judges and not having as much time. And I don't know that that's completely true. Obviously, if a show ends and you're on the back sideline, you've got to walk across the field. But, I mean, that's when I use my time to wrap up, as I would anyway if I was sitting up in the stands. What I'm starting to do is, as long as we're using paper, instead of writing out a lot, I tend to turn the score sheet over and use the rubric and the descriptors and circle and make maybe small 1 or 2 words associated with that, rather than write out a bunch of sentences. Because, you know, some people are going to look at that, some aren't, but at least it gives them something.
Correct. That's a great idea.
That's a great idea there.
All right. So that's all the questions that we had from the survey that was sent out. Tim, Stephen, thank you so much for coming in and talking about this a little bit. I'll give you a chance if you had anything that you didn't get a chance to say that you wanted to. I'll give you that chance now. Otherwise, we can go ahead and wrap up here.
I'll just say,
go ahead. Yeah, go ahead, Tim.
I'll just say, you know, again, it's our job to identify and reward everything we can about the show. And no, we're not going to be perfect. Everybody's going to make mistakes. We're all going to miss things. But I think as long as we're out there trying our best and trying to learn and be flexible about getting better, reading up on things, that's what's going to help the most. And Stephen's talking about, you know, working with some people that are maybe newer to this. I think that's kind of our job as a teacher, an educator, to work with them as well and help them along, answer questions, and you know, just be a mentor to them throughout the show.
Great point.
I always try to go into a show, and I didn't, you know, invent this idea, but trying to think, okay, for the next 11 minutes or the next 7 minutes, I'm on the staff of this ensemble, and whatever I can do for the next 7 minutes to make them better. And I can't actually teach them, but I can give them as much useful feedback as I possibly can so that their next performance is better. And then you're kind of emotionally bought into it. Like, I want this band to get better. What can I do for these next 11 minutes to help them get better? If you go into it like that, you're at least coming into it from a genuine standpoint of hoping to see improvement.
Absolutely.
Great points. All right. Well, again, thank you, Stephen and Tim, for talking to us about some of these ideas. As far as our judges, be on the lookout on Sunday for another survey to be coming out from the KMEA office. And please give us some questions to talk about. There's no questions that's too dumb or too basic. We want these questions so we can start a dialogue with one another.